The day I overheard the CEO's plan to fire me. How much is your loyalty worth? Because I just found out mine is exactly zero. He's playing for my life. So, I'm playing for his empire. They say everything is bigger in Texas. The hats, the trucks, the egos. But what they don't tell you is that the betrayals are bigger here, too. They're as wide as the plains and just as cold as a north wind hitting the panhandle in January. My name is Ivana. For 7 years, I was the most hardworking at Thorne & Associates. I was the one who smoothed over the CEO's tantrums. I was the one who drafted the strategies that put us on the Fortune 500 list. I stayed until the janitors turned off the lights, and I arrived before the sun hit the Trinity River. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was family. But family doesn't sharpen the knife while your back is turned. It was a Tuesday in November. One of those Texas afternoons where the heat finally breaks and gives way to a deceptive pleasant chill. The office was quiet, that expensive, pressurized quiet that only exists in the top floor suites of Dallas. I had stayed late to finish the Q4 projections for our end-of-year board meeting. I was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind of exhaustion you feel when you think you're winning. I needed a coffee, real coffee, not the sludge from the breakroom pod machine. The executive lounge had the Italian press Richard Thorne loved so much. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway. My heels made no sound on the plush Persian rugs. I reached the lounge, but I stopped. The door to the CEO's private office was ajar. Just a crack, a sliver of golden light spilling onto the mahogany floor. I should have kept walking. I should have been the loyal soldier I'd always been. But I heard my name. Not just mentioned but spat. Ivana is getting too expensive, Arthur. Her stock options vest in January. If she stays through the board meeting, it'll cost us $10 million to buy her out during the merger. That was Richard, the man who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding because my own father couldn't be there. Then came Arthur Finch, the CFO. A man I'd personally saved from a fraud investigation 3 years prior. His voice was like oil on water. I agree. We let her finish the merger documentation. She's the only one who knows the filing structure inside out. Once the board signs off on December 31st, we hand her the pink slip. Professional misconduct. We'll find a reason. A security breach or something equally messy. It nullifies the vesting. We save the $10 million and she goes home with nothing but her desk plant. The air in the hallway suddenly felt very thin. I felt a coldness start at the base of my spine and crawl up to my throat. $10 million. 7 years of my life. All of it was being calculated as a cost-saving measure. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't a friend. I was an entry on a spreadsheet that they were about to delete with a single keystroke. You're listening to this because you've felt it too, haven't you? That sudden, sickening realization that the people you trust are just waiting for you to stumble. If you don't subscribe to this channel right now, you're choosing to stay in the dark. You're choosing to be the one who gets fired on December 31st. Subscribe now, or if you're too afraid to see how this ends, go to the comments and tell everyone why you prefer to be a victim. I'll wait. I stood there, perfectly still, watching that sliver of light. In that moment, the Ivana who cared about company culture died. The Ivana who valued loyalty was buried under that expensive rug. I realized that Richard and Arthur had made one fatal mistake. They thought I was a sheep they were leading to the slaughter. They forgot that I was the one who built the fence. I knew every hole, every weakness and every secret in this building. If they wanted me gone by the end of the year, I would give them exactly what they asked for. But I wouldn't be leaving alone. I would be taking the walls down with me. I turned around and walked back to my desk. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and looked at the Q4 projections on my dual monitors. Millions of dollars in potential revenue. All of it was mine. I pulled out a clean, black notebook. On the first page I wrote a list of names. The clients who only stayed with Thorne & Associates because of me. The vendors who only gave us discounts because I knew their children's names. Then I looked at the clock. It was 6:45 p.m. The countdown had begun. They gave me 6 weeks. I only needed 4. The next morning, I arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. I wore my best power suit, a sharp, charcoal gray that made me look like a statue. I stopped by the florist on the way in and bought a massive bouquet of lilies for Richard's desk. A thank you for the wonderful mentorship he'd given me over the years. It was poetic irony. Lilies are for funerals. When Richard walked in, He looked at the flowers and then at me. For a split second, I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of guilt. No. It was just calculation. He was wondering if the flowers meant I suspected something. Ivana, you shouldn't have, he said, flashing that multi-million-dollar smile. You're the heart of this company. I just wanted you to know how much I appreciate the opportunity, Richard. I replied. My voice was steady. A masterclass in deception. I'm going to make this merger the crowning achievement of your career. He beamed. He actually leaned back in his chair, looking like a king. He didn't realize I had just told him exactly how I was going to destroy him. It would be the crowning achievement of his career because it would be the last thing he ever achieved. The first step of my revenge wasn't loud. It was digital. I was the administrator for our proprietary CRM, the Vault, we called it. It held every contract, every lead, and every sensitive email sent in the last decade. Richard and Arthur assumed I was merely organizing it for the merger audit. Instead, I began the extraction. Every night, I stayed late. I was creating a mirrored database on a private encrypted server I'd set up in my apartment. I wasn't stealing company secrets, I was reclaiming my own work, my strategies, my contact lists, my intellectual property that they had planned to steal from me by nullifying my contract. But I had to be careful. Arthur was a hawk when it came to data logs. If he saw a massive external transfer, it was over. So I did it like a slow poisoner. A few files at a time. Buried inside legitimate backup routines. I made the system look like it was glitching, creating a trail of IT tickets that I'd filed months ago, complaining about server instability. I was laying the groundwork for the security breach they were planning to frame me for. It's funny how easy it is to manipulate people when they think you're beneath them. They looked at me and saw a girl who was good with spreadsheets. They didn't see the architect. They didn't see the woman who knew that the company's entire legal defense for the merger rested on a single, unsigned addendum in a file from 2019. A file that I moved to my personal drive. And then I deleted the original from the server. Without that addendum, it was a ticking time bomb. And I was the only one holding the detonator. On Thursday of that week, Arthur called me into his office. He looked nervous. He was holding a printout of the server logs. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face as cold as a frozen lake. Ivana, he said, his eyes squinting through his glasses. The server traffic is unusually high in your sector. Care to explain? This was it. The first turning point. I had to choose, play dumb, or play the victim. I chose both. Oh, Arthur. I'm so glad you noticed. I've been meaning to tell you. I think we're being hacked. I've been trying to move the files to a secure subfolder to protect them, but the system keeps dragging. I've stayed until midnight every night trying to fix it. I'm so worried about Richard's legacy. I let a single, perfect tear well up in my eye. Arthur's posture relaxed. He actually let out a condescending little chuckle. Don't you worry your head about that, Ivana. You just keep doing what you're doing. We'll handle the security side. He thought I was a frazzled, emotional woman. He thought I was doing his work for him. As I walked out of his office, I wiped the tear away. I felt a surge of power so intense it was almost intoxicating. I'll keep doing exactly what I'm doing, Arthur, I whispered to the empty hallway. And you'll never see the end coming. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a betrayal. It isn't empty, it's heavy. It's the sound of every memory you have with a person being rewritten in real time. Every good job, every "we're proud of you," every Christmas bonus. They weren't rewards. They were bribes to keep me quiet while they built the gallows. By the start of the third week, the heartbreak had finished its work. It had burned through the soft parts of my soul and left behind something carbon hard. I stopped looking at Richard and Arthur as mentors. I started looking at them as obstacles. And in Texas, you don't move an obstacle, you bulldoze it. My plan required a front. I couldn't just sit in my office and plot. I had to be the most visible, most loyal employee in the building. I volunteered to lead the Internal Synergy Task Force, a fancy name for the team responsible for merging the two companies' cultures. It was the perfect cover. It gave me a legitimate reason to interview every single department head, to look into their budgets, and most importantly, to see who was unhappy. I spent my afternoons in the glass room, a conference space that looked out over the city. One by one, I brought in the heavy hitters, the lead developers, the top-tier sales reps, the creative directors. I asked them about their dreams. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Marcus? I asked our lead software architect. Marcus was a genius, the kind of guy who saw code in his sleep. He'd been passed over for a VP role 3 times because Richard liked his current output too much to move him. Marcus sighed, leaning back. Honestly, Ivana? Not here. I feel like I'm a gear in a machine that doesn't even use oil. But where else is there to go in Dallas that pays this well? I smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who just saw the prey step into the light. What if there was a place that didn't just pay well? What if there was a place where you owned the code you wrote? Where you weren't a gear, but the engine? I was headhunting for my own company while sitting in Richard Thorne's office, using Richard Thorne's electricity, and being paid by Richard Thorne's payroll. It was a dangerous game. If Arthur Finch decided to look at the security tapes and saw me leaning in close to the top talent, whispering about future possibilities, he might get curious. But Arthur was too busy with the merger's hidden accounts, the ones I knew were being used to funnel money into their exit bonuses. Greed makes people blind. They were so focused on the 10 million they were stealing from me that they didn't see me stealing the very brain trust that made the company worth anything at all. The real sting, though the thing that almost broke my composure, happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the archives, pulling old tax records for the audit, when I found a folder marked Project Sunset. My hands shook as I opened it. It wasn't about the merger. It was a detailed timeline of my replacement. They hadn't just decided to fire me a week ago. This had been in the works for 6 months. There were resumes inside. Resumes of women younger than me, cheaper than me. Richard had even made notes in the margins. Candidate A, compliant. Won't push back on executive expenses. Half the salary of Ivana. 6 months. For 6 months, Richard had sat across from me at our weekly lunches, asking about my life, telling me I was like a daughter to him, all while he was interviewing my replacement. He had watched me work 80-hour weeks to save his company from a PR disaster in August, knowing full well he was going to discard me like a used tissue in December. The pain was a physical weight in my chest. I had to lean against the cold metal filing cabinet to keep from falling. I felt like a fool. A dedicated, hard-working, loyal fool. But then the pain turned into a cold, blue flame. I took out my phone and photographed every page of Project Sunset. I photographed the candidates' resumes. I photographed Richard's handwriting. Then I did something I never thought I was capable of. I went into the digital payroll system. I didn't change my salary. I didn't steal money. Instead, I set up a delayed trigger in the bonus distribution algorithm. It was a piece of logic buried so deep in the COBOL-based backend that only someone who had been there since the beginning, someone like me, would ever find it. On January 1st, when the bonuses were supposed to be wired to Richard and Arthur's offshore accounts, the trigger would activate. It wouldn't stop the transfer. It would reroute 10% of it to a disparity fund I had created for the junior staff, the ones Richard had been underpaying for years. And the remaining 90%? It would be held in a legal escrow account pending an internal audit of ethical compliance, an audit that would be triggered by an anonymous tip containing the photos I had just taken. I wasn't just leaving. I was making sure that the money they were willing to kill my career for would be the very thing that hung them. I walked out of the archives and ran into Arthur in the hall. He was holding a glass of scotch. He looked celebratory. "Great work on those projections, Ivana," he said, patting my shoulder. His hand felt like a snake's skin. "The board is going to be very impressed. You've really secured your future here." I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. "I know I have, Arthur," I said. "I've never been more certain of where I'm going." He walked away, chuckling, thinking he'd successfully played me. He didn't realize that in my mind, his office was already empty. His building was already on fire, and I was the only one with the exit key. I went home that night and registered a new LLC. The name? Sunset Acquisitions. Richard wanted a Project Sunset? Fine. I would give him one. But in my version, the sun wouldn't just set on my career. It would set on his entire empire. In the corporate world, information is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. But in Texas, information is a weapon. And if you're going to pull the trigger, you have to make sure you're the only one who knows the safety is off. By the 4th week, I had moved past the heartbreak. I was in the execution phase. Every morning, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. While the rest of the city slept, I was building the foundation of my new world. I had already secured the LLC for Sunset Acquisitions. Now I needed the fuel. I needed the clients. I invited our top client, Elias Thorne, no relation to Richard, though Richard treated him like a god, to breakfast at the mansion on Turtle Creek. Elias was an old-school oil tycoon who had pivoted to renewable energy. He controlled a portfolio worth $400 million. And he hated incompetence. Richard thought he owned Elias. He thought their handshake deals at the country club were unbreakable. He was wrong. Ivana, Elias said, cutting into a steak. Richard tells me the merger is going to streamline everything. Says I'll be getting even better service. I took a slow sip of my tea. I let the silence hang for exactly 3 seconds. Richard is very optimistic, Elias. He's focused on the macro scale, the big picture, the exit strategy. Elias paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He was a predator. He could smell a shift in the wind from a mile away. Exit strategy? He told me he was in this for the next decade. I lowered my voice, leaning in just enough to signal intimacy but not weakness. Richard is a visionary, but visions change when 10-figure bonuses are on the table. My concern, and this is just a personal concern, as the person who manages your account, is the account optimization plan Arthur Finch is drafting. I just rearranged the truth. I showed him a draft of the new service agreement Arthur had asked me to prepare. It was a document I had intentionally filled with hidden fees, tiered service levels that would charge Elias more for the same attention I used to give him for free, and a clause that allowed the company to outsource his data management to a third party in Southeast Asia. Arthur hadn't seen this version yet. He wouldn't see it until I accidentally included it in the final board deck. But Elias saw it now. Outsourcing? Elias's voice went low. Richard promised me my data stays in Texas. On secure servers. I'm sure he meant it at the time, I whispered. But the merger requires sacrifices to satisfy the investors. I watched the trust die in Elias's eyes. It didn't feel good. Elias was a decent man, but I wasn't doing this to hurt him. I was doing this to save him from the sinking ship. I was giving him a lifeboat, and I was the one at the oars. Back at the office, the atmosphere was becoming toxic. Richard was paranoid. He had started calling emergency meetings at 9 p.m. just to see who would show up. He was testing us. He was looking for any sign of the disloyalty he was planning to accuse me of. I was always the first one there. I brought him his favorite scotch. I laughed at his jokes. I was the perfect soldier. It's exhausting, being the person they think you are, while being the person you actually are. It's like living in 2 skins at once. One night, Arthur stayed late. He caught me in the break room. He was leaning against the counter, looking at me with a strange, predatory intensity. You're working too hard, Ivana, he said. You look tired. Maybe you should take some time off after the board meeting. A long vacation, somewhere far away. He was testing the waters. He was preparing me for the pink slip talk. He wanted to see if I'd fight or if I'd go quietly. I'm just focused on the finish line, Arthur, I said, giving him a tired, grateful smile. I want everything to be perfect for you and Richard. I feel like my whole life has been leading up to this merger. He smiled a wide, oily grin. It has, Ivana. It really has. As soon as he left, I went back to my desk. My heart was racing. I had been siphoning the client data, but now I needed to do something much bolder. I needed the shadow ledger. Every big firm in Texas has 2 sets of books, not necessarily illegal but creative, one for the IRS, and one for the partners. The shadow ledger contained the real reason Richard and Arthur were so desperate for. It wasn't about growth, it was about debt. They had over-leveraged the company to buy a private jet and a series of real estate holdings in Austin that were currently underwater. The merger wasn't a triumph, it was a bailout. And they were using my $10 million buyout to cover the interest on their personal loans. I knew the ledger was on an air-gapped laptop in Richard's private safe. I knew the code. Richard had used the same code for everything since 2012, the birth date of the daughter he claimed I was like. I waited until the janitor moved to the other side of the floor. I slipped into Richard's office. The air smelled of expensive cigars and old ego. I knelt by the safe. My fingers were cold. My breath hitching. I entered the numbers, 051294. The safe clicked open. Inside physical file. A thick, manila envelope with my name on it. I opened it, expecting more termination papers. Instead, I found a series of private investigator reports. Richard had been following me. He had photos of me at the mansion on Turtle Creek with Elias. He had logs of my late-night office hours. He didn't know what I was doing yet, but he knew I was doing something. He was building a case to sue me for breach of fiduciary duty. He wanted to make sure I never worked in this industry again. He wanted to destroy me completely so I could never tell the world about his debts. I heard footsteps in the hall. Heavy. Purposeful. Richard was coming back. I had 5 seconds. I grabbed the Shadow Ledger laptop, shoved the PI file into my blazer, and slammed the safe shut. I didn't have time to lock it properly. I dove under the massive mahogany desk, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. The door opened, the lights flicked on. I could see his shoes. Polished Italian leather. 3 feet from my face. Where is that girl? Richard muttered to himself. She was supposed to leave the audit notes on my desk. I held my breath until my lungs screamed. I saw him walk toward the safe. He stopped. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. If he looked down, if he saw the safe wasn't fully seated, if he heard the frantic thrum of my heart, it was over. Then his phone rang. Arthur? Yeah. No, I'm in the office. No, she's not here. Probably finally went home. Good. Let's talk about the security breach protocol. I want it ready by Monday. He flicked the light off and walked out. I stayed under the desk for 10 minutes in the pitch black. My tears were finally gone. In their place was a cold, crystalline clarity. Richard Thorne didn't want a clean break. He wanted a war. Fine, Richard, I whispered into the darkness. You want a war? I'll give you a massacre. There's a moment in every hunt where the roles reverse. Where the predator becomes so obsessed with the kill that they stop looking over their shoulder. Richard Thorne was so busy building a cage for me that he didn't realize I had already dismantled the floor beneath his feet. I sat on my living room floor that night, the Shadow Ledger laptop glowing like a radioactive brick in the dark. I didn't sleep. You don't sleep when you have the power to dismantle a 50-year legacy in your hands. I spent 4 hours dissecting the truth. The project wasn't just a bailout. It was a shell game. Richard and Arthur had been moving money from the employee pension fund into an offshore account called Apex North Star. They were using our retirements, my retirement, to fund their personal real estate losses in Austin. It wasn't just corporate greed. It was theft, plain and simple, but the major betrayal wasn't the theft. It was the how. I found a subfolder in the ledger titled Liability Shield. I opened it, and my blood turned to ice. They had forged my digital signature on 3 separate wire transfers to the offshore accounts. They weren't just going to fire me for misconduct. They were setting me up to be the fall girl for their embezzlement. If the SEC ever came knocking, the paper trail led straight to my desk. They weren't just taking my $10 million, they were taking my freedom. They were prepared to let me go to prison for 20 years so they could keep their private jets. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the coffee table. I had worked for this man for 7 years. I had watched his children grow up. I had comforted him when his wife left him. And all that time he was measuring my neck for a noose. I looked at the photos the private investigator had taken of me. They were invasive, intimate. Photos of me at the gym. Photos of me at my mother's grave. They hadn't just been following me, they had been looking for leverage. Looking for a way to break me if I fought back. In that moment, the last shred of Ivana, the girl who wanted to be good, evaporated. I didn't call the police. Not yet. In Texas, the law is slow and men like Richard Thorne own the people who write the laws. No, I needed something more permanent than an arrest. I needed a total erasure. I began to work. I wasn't siphoning anymore. I was transplanting. I took the evidence of the forged signatures and mirrored it onto 3 different cloud servers. Then, I began to write the whistleblower protocol. I drafted a 100-page dossier, but I didn't address it to the SEC. I addressed it to the other company in the project, Global Titan Group. Global Titan was a massive conglomerate out of New York. They were sharks, but they were legal sharks. They wanted this project because of Thorne and Associates' reputation. If they found out they were buying a debt-ridden, embezzling carcass, they wouldn't just cancel the deal, they would sue Richard into the Stone Age. But I wasn't going to send it yet. Timing is everything. If I sent it now, I'd be a disgruntled employee. If I sent it during the board meeting, I'd be a ghost from the machine. Suddenly, my phone lit up. It was a text from an unknown number. I saw what you took from the safe. Meet me at the diner on Industrial Boulevard now, or the police get the security breach report tonight. My heart stopped. I hadn't been alone in the office. The janitor? No. The security guard? No. I grabbed my keys and the laptop. I didn't have a choice. I drove through the empty streets of Dallas, the neon signs blurring into streaks of red and blue. The diner was a greasy spoon, the kind of place where people go to disappear. I walked in, the bell above the door ringing like a death knell. Sitting in the back booth, shrouded in the smoke of a cheap cigarette, was Sarah, the junior marketing manager I had been mentoring, the one I thought was a replacement. She looked up at me, and there was no warmth in her eyes. Only a hard, mirrored reflection of my own ambition. "You're late, Ivana," she said, tapping an ash into a porcelain tray. "How did you see me?" I asked, sitting across from her. My hand was on the laptop in my bag, my finger hovering over the wipe command. "I didn't see you," she said with a cruel little smile. "I heard you. I put a bug in Richard's office 3 weeks ago. I've been waiting for him to slip up so I could blackmail him. But you found something much better than a mistress or a bribe, didn't you?" She leaned forward, her eyes glowing with greed. "You found the ledger. And now, you're going to give me half of whatever you're planning, or I'm calling Arthur Finch. He's already looking for a reason to put you in handcuffs. I think theft of proprietary intellectual property sounds like a good start, don't you?" I looked at Sarah. I had taught her everything she knew. I had shared my coffee with her. I had defended her when Richard called her unqualified. I realized then that the rot at Thorne and Associates wasn't just at the top, it was in the soil. It was everywhere. I didn't panic. I didn't even blink. I just looked at her and felt a strange, chilling sense of relief. "Sarah," I said softly. "You think you're playing a game of blackmail, but you're actually standing in the middle of a minefield, and I'm the only one with the map." I opened the laptop and turned it toward her. I didn't show her the money. I showed her the liability shield file. I showed her where they had already started drafting her name as an accomplice to the forged signatures. "They aren't just firing me, Sarah. They're burying us both. You're not my enemy. You're my passenger. Now, sit down, shut up, and listen. Because we're about to take this whole building down. There is a point in every betrayal where the anger runs out of fuel, where you stop feeling like a warrior and start feeling like a ghost." Sitting across from Sarah, watching her face turn from predatory greed to a sickly pale terror as she saw her own name on Richard's accomplice list, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. I realized that for 7 years I hadn't been working in a company, I'd been working in a parasite. It didn't just take my time, it took my capacity to trust. It had turned a girl like Sarah, who came to Dallas with big eyes and a degree in ethics, into a blackmailer. They wouldn't," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the digital signatures. "I've done everything Richard asked. I've worked through holidays. I even fetched his dry cleaning when his assistant quit." I let out a dry, mirthless laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. Soft tone. "That's exactly why they chose you, Sarah. You're helpful. You're loyal. You're the perfect person to point a finger at because everyone knows you'd do anything for the firm. In their world, that doesn't make you family. It makes you a fall guy." I looked out the window at the empty street. I thought about the first day I started at Thorne and Associates. I remembered how proud I was of that tiny cubicle. I remembered how Richard had given me a pen with the company logo on it and told me I was the future of the firm. I still have that pen in my desk. I've used it to sign every major deal for the last 3 years. I thought I was writing my success story. I was just signing my own death warrant. For the first time since I overheard that conversation in the lounge, the weight of it all hit me. The isolation. The terrifying reality that if I failed, if I missed even one step in this dance, I wouldn't just be unemployed. I'd be in a cell. Sarah reached across the table, her hand shaking as she tried to touch the laptop. "What do we do?" "We have to go to the police, Ivana." "Right now?" "No," I said, my voice snapping back to a cold, hard edge. I pulled the laptop back. "In this city, the police have lunch with Richard Thorne. The district attorney plays golf with Arthur Finch. If we walk in there with a laptop we stole from a private safe, we'll be arrested before we finish the first sentence. Richard will say we planted the files, he'll say we're the ones who embezzled the money and we're trying to frame him. I leaned in, my eyes boring into hers. We don't go to the law. We go to the market. We go to the one thing Richard Thorne fears more than God: irrelevance. I left Sarah at the diner with a choice: stay and be a victim or follow my lead and become a ghost. I didn't wait for her answer. I drove back to my apartment, but I didn't go inside. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the engine clicking as it cooled. I thought about my mother. She had been a secretary for 40 years. She believed in the gold watch. She believed that if you worked hard and stayed quiet, the world would take care of you. I wanted to call her. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to tell her that the world doesn't take care of you. It eats you. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her know the danger I was in. I had to carry this alone. My phone buzzed. It was an automated alert from the office security system. Someone had logged into my workstation. At 4 a.m. Arthur. He was looking for the security breach he'd mentioned to Richard. He was planting the evidence right now. He was putting the misconduct files on my computer so they would be there when the IT audit happened on Monday. I watched the remote access log on my phone. File uploaded. Marketing. Expenses. Unauthorized. XLSX. File uploaded. Client. Kickback. Logs. PDF. He was doing it. He was killing my reputation while I sat in a parking garage. I felt a strange sense of peace. The heartbreak was gone. The grief was buried. There was only the mission now. I opened my laptop and connected to the office server through the backdoor I'd created when I set up the CRM. I didn't delete what Arthur was uploading. I let him finish. And then, I added a read-only tag to his uploads, encrypted them with a password he didn't have, and redirected the logs to show that the files were uploaded from his home IP address. He was building a trap for me. I just turned it into a mirror. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for the first time in 48 hours. "Enjoy the weekend, Arthur," I whispered. "It's the last one you'll ever have as a free man." Monday was coming. And with it, the board meeting. The day I was supposed to be fired. They think they're attending a board meeting. They don't realize they're attending an autopsy. And I'm the one with the scalpel. There is a point in every betrayal where the anger runs out of fuel. Where you stop feeling like a warrior and start feeling like a ghost. Sitting across from Sarah, watching her face turn from predatory greed to a sickly, pale terror as she saw her own name on Richard's accomplice list. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. I realized that for 7 years, I hadn't been working in a company. I'd been working in a parasite. It didn't just take my time. It took my capacity to trust. It had turned a girl like Sarah who came to Dallas with big eyes and a degree in ethics into a blackmailer. They wouldn't, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the digital signatures. "I've done everything Richard asked. I've worked through holidays. I even fetched his dry cleaning when his assistant quit." I let out a dry, mirthless laugh. It sounded like glass breaking, soft tone. "That's exactly why they chose you, Sarah. You're helpful. You're loyal. You're the perfect person to point a finger at because everyone knows you'd do anything for the firm. In their world, that doesn't make you family. It makes you a fall guy." I looked out the window at the empty street. I thought about the first day I started at Thorne and Associates. I remembered how proud I was of that tiny cubicle. I remembered how Richard had given me a pen with the company logo on it and told me I was the future of the firm. I still have that pen in my desk. I've used it to sign every major deal for the last 3 years. I thought I was writing my success story. I was just signing my own death warrant. For the first time since I overheard that conversation in the lounge, the weight of it all hit me, the isolation. The terrifying reality that if I failed, if I missed even one step in this dance, I wouldn't just be unemployed. I'd be in a cell. Sarah reached across the table, her hand shaking as she tried to touch the laptop. "What do we do?" "We have to go to the police, Ivana." "Right now?" "No," I said, my voice snapping back to a cold, hard edge. I pulled the laptop back. "In this city, the police have lunch with Richard Thorne. The district attorney plays golf with Arthur Finch. If we walk in there with a laptop we stole from a private safe, we'll be arrested before we finish the first sentence. Richard will say we planted the files. He'll say we're the ones who embezzled the money and we're trying to frame him. I leaned in, my eyes boring into hers. We don't go to the law. We go to the market. We go to the one thing Richard Thorne fears more than God: irrelevance. I left Sarah at the diner with a choice: stay and be a victim, or follow my lead and become a ghost. I didn't wait for her answer. I drove back to my apartment, but I didn't go inside. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the engine clicking as it cooled. I thought about my mother. She had been a secretary for 40 years, she believed in the gold watch. She believed that if you worked hard and stayed quiet, the world would take care of you. I wanted to call her. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to tell her that the world doesn't take care of you, it eats you. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her know the danger I was in. I had to carry this alone. My phone buzzed. It was an automated alert from the office security system. Someone had logged into my workstation. At 4 a.m. Arthur. He was looking for the security breach he'd mentioned to Richard. He was planting the evidence right now. He was putting the misconduct files on my computer so they would be there when the IT audit happened on Monday. I watched the remote access log on my phone. File uploaded. He was doing it. He was killing my reputation while I sat in a parking garage. I felt a strange sense of peace. The heartbreak was gone. The grief was buried. There was only the mission now. I opened my laptop and connected to the office server through the backdoor I'd created when I set up the CRM. I didn't delete what Arthur was uploading. I let him finish. And then, I added a read-only tag to his uploads, encrypted them with a password he didn't have, and redirected the logs to show that the files were uploaded from his home IP address. He was building a trap for me. I just turned it into a mirror. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for the first time in 48 hours. "Enjoy the weekend, Arthur," I whispered. "It's the last one you'll ever have as a free man." Monday was coming. And with it, the board meeting. The day I was supposed to be fired. They think they're attending a board meeting. They don't realize they're attending an autopsy. And I'm the one with the scalpel. Revenge is often depicted as a messy, emotional outburst. A scream in a hallway. A slapped face. But in the high-rises of Dallas, real revenge is a mathematical equation. It is the art of moving the decimal point until the man who thought he was a billionaire wakes up as a pauper. I had 72 hours until the board meeting. 72 hours to finalize the Sunset Acquisitions launch and ensure that when I walked out of Thorne and Associates, the company's most valuable assets walked out in my pocket. I spent the weekend in a state of hyperlucidity. I wasn't just planning a resignation. I was planning an extraction. First, I reached out to the vultures. In every industry, there are people who wait for a titan to stumble so they can pick the bones. I called a contact at a boutique legal firm that specialized in ethical corporate dissolution. I didn't tell them everything, but I showed them enough of the shadow ledger to make their mouths water. I put them on a $50,000 retainer money I took from my own savings. It was the best investment I ever made. Next, I addressed the secret discovery. While digging into the Apex North Star account, the offshore shell used for the embezzlement, I found a secondary layer of encryption. It wasn't just money moving out. It was data moving in. Richard Thorne wasn't just stealing money from the pension fund. He was selling the intellectual property of our clients to a competitor in Dubai. I found a series of encrypted architectural blueprints for a smart city project Elias Thorne, my top client, had been developing in secret. Richard was selling the prototypes. He was literally selling his clients' futures to cover his own past mistakes. This wasn't just a security breach. This was high-level corporate espionage. And the buyer? It was the very same firm Global Titan Group the merger partner was trying to beat in the New York market. If Global Titan found out that Richard was selling secrets to their biggest rival, they wouldn't just cancel the merger. They would incinerate him. I had the leverage. Now, I needed the exodus. I began sending encrypted messages to the inner circle I'd been cultivating: Marcus, the architect, Elena, the head of PR, and 3 of our best sales leads. I didn't send them a pitch. I sent them a link. The link led to a secure portal for Sunset Acquisitions. On the landing page, there was no corporate jargon. Just a simple message. The ship is sinking. The lifeboats are ready. Your contracts are already drafted. Your salaries are matched, and your stock options vest on day 1. Click Accept to leave the graveyard. I watched the dashboard in real time. Marcus, accepted. Elena, accepted. Salas lead uno, accepted. Within 2 hours, I had hired 80% of the talent that made Thorne and Associates functional. They were still sitting at their desks in the office, but their loyalty and their legal futures now belonged to me. I froze. I looked at the security camera feed on my tablet. It was Sarah. She looked disheveled, her eyes red from crying. She was holding a manila envelope. I opened the door, and she practically collapsed into the hallway. I found it, she gasped, thrusting the envelope at me. I went back to the office. I used the bug in Richard's desk. He had a private meeting with the Global Titan reps tonight. Unofficial, off the books. I opened the envelope. Inside were transcripts of the recording. Richard hadn't just been planning to fire me. He had promised the Global Titan reps that he would deliver my confession for the embezzlement by Tuesday morning. He told them I was a rogue element and that he was taking the hit by firing me to keep the company clean. He was selling my life to close his deal. He was using me as a human sacrifice to appease the New York Sharks. There's more, Sarah whispered. I heard them talking about the security breach. They're going to call the police to the board meeting. They want you arrested in front of the board so there's no chance you can speak. They're going to frame it as catching a thief in the act. I looked at the transcripts. I looked at the screens in my apartment. I looked at Sarah. They want a show? I asked. My voice was as cold as a Texas winter. Fine. We'll give them a production they'll never forget. I spent the rest of the night refining the counter-protocol. I didn't just want to escape. I wanted to ensure that when the police arrived at that board meeting, the handcuffs weren't for me. Richard Thorne thought he was the director of this play. He didn't realize I'd already rewritten the script, hired the cast, and bought the theater. Sarah, I said, handing her a flash drive. Go to the SEC's regional office in Fort Worth. Don't go inside. Just wait in the parking lot. I'll send you a text at 10:15 a.m. on Monday. When you get that text, you walk in and hand this to the duty officer. Not a second before. What are you going to be doing? She asked. I picked up my blazer and checked my reflection in the dark window. I'm going to my final board meeting, I said. I have a presentation to give. The morning of your own execution is surprisingly quiet. You notice things you ignored for years. The way the light hits the receptionist's desk, the specific hum of the HVAC system, the smell of expensive cologne masking the scent of fear in the elevator. I walked into the building at 8:45 a.m. I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front doors with my head held high, wearing a white suit, white for purity, white for the vacuum I was about to leave behind. In my briefcase, I didn't have the Q4 projections. I had the Shadow Ledger laptop, a series of sworn affidavits from the staff who had already jumped ship and a single physical resignation letter. I took the elevator to the 50th floor. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was thick, people were whispering. The security breach rumors had already been leaked by Arthur. The staff looked at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. They thought they were looking at a dead woman walking. I walked past Arthur's office. He was standing by his window, his back to me. He didn't even turn around. He thought he'd already won. He thought the police were already downstairs, waiting for his signal. There is no arrogance more dangerous than the arrogance of a man who thinks he's smarter than the woman who's been cleaning up his messes for a decade. I entered the boardroom. Richard Thorne was at the head of the table. To his right were the 3 representatives from Global Titan Group, the Sharks from New York. They looked bored, their expensive watches catching the morning sun. Ivana, Richard said, his voice booming with a fake, paternal warmth. You're just in time. We were about to start the executive session. Why don't you set up the Q4 deck? Actually, Richard, I said, my voice echoing in the sterile room. I think we should start with a different presentation. One regarding operational integrity and the Apex North Star account. The air left the room. Richard's smile didn't fade, it froze. It became a mask of stone. The Global Titan reps looked up, their boredom instantly replaced by a sharp, predatory interest. Ivana, Arthur said, stepping into the room behind me, his voice trembling with a forced anger. That's enough. We know about the security breach. We know what you've been doing on the servers at night. If you leave now, maybe we can keep the authorities out of this. I didn't look at Arthur. I looked at the Global Titan reps. I connected the Shadow Ledger laptop to the massive 80-inch screen at the end of the table. Mr. Thorne and Mr. Finch would like you to believe that I am a rogue employee, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. But what you're about to see is a record of where your merger capital is actually going. It's not going into synergy or infrastructure. It's going into the Apex North Star account to cover personal real estate losses in Austin. I clicked the first slide. The screen filled with bank statements, forged signatures, the liability shield documents. And then, the piece de resistance, the Dubai espionage logs. The blueprints Richard had been selling to their rivals. Richard stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. This is a fabrication. She's hacked the system. She's trying to sabotage the merger because she's being terminated. One of the global Titan reps, a woman with eyes like blue ice, held up a hand. Sit down, Richard. She looked at me. Can you verify these IP addresses? The ones showing the Dubai transfers. Yes, I said. They originate from the private VPN registered to Richard Thorne's home office. The logs were mirrored to an external server the moment the transfers were initiated. I've already provided the encrypted keys to the SEC. I looked at my watch. 10:14 a.m. And as for the security breach Arthur mentioned? I continued, looking directly at the CFO. He's right. There was a breach. On Saturday night, Arthur Finch logged into my workstation from his home IP and uploaded 3 forged misconduct files to my directory. I have the screen capture recordings of him doing it in real time. Arthur's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled purple. He reached for his phone, likely to call the police he'd staged downstairs. Don't bother, Arthur, I said. I've already called them. But I didn't call the Dallas PD. I called the FBI's corporate fraud division. And I told them to meet Sarah in the lobby. I turned back to the board. I am officially resigning, effective immediately. But I'm not leaving alone. As of 9 o'clock this morning, 80% of your senior staff has signed contracts with Sunset Acquisitions. Your intellectual property is safe. I've locked the servers, but the people who know how to use it, they're already in the elevator. The boardroom doors burst open. It wasn't the security guards Richard was expecting. It was 4 men in dark suits with FBI windbreakers. I picked up my briefcase. I walked toward the door. As I passed Richard, he looked at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He was a ghost in a $5,000 suit. You told me I was the future of the firm, Richard. I whispered so only he could hear. You were right. I am the future. And you. You're just the wreckage I'm leaving behind. I walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut behind me was the only thank you I ever needed. In physics, a vacuum is unstable. It demands to be filled. When I walked out of that boardroom, I didn't just leave a hole in the company. I removed the entire foundation. Richard and Arthur were being read their rights, but the real destruction was only beginning. Most people think revenge ends when the bad guy gets arrested. That's for movies. In the real world, the arrest is just the opening bell. Now, I had to ensure that while they were fighting for their freedom in a courtroom, I was seizing their kingdom in the marketplace. I sat in the back of the SUV and opened my laptop. The Exodus dashboard was lit up like a Christmas tree. My team, the real team, was already congregating at a temporary co-working space I'd leased in the Bishop Arts District. No marble floors, no gold-plated nameplates. Just high-speed fiber and a shared sense of liberation. But there was a problem, a test from the enemy. Even from behind bars, Richard Thorne had a network. By 11:30 a.m., his high-priced fixer attorneys had filed an emergency injunction against Sunset Acquisitions. They were claiming theft of trade secrets and tortious interference. They were trying to freeze our bank accounts before we could even pay our first month's rent. They thought they could starve me out. They thought if I couldn't pay the talent I'd recruited, the talent would run back to the safety of Thorne and Associates. It was the Global Titan Group, the sharks from New York. They were still in the boardroom, probably surrounded by lawyers and federal agents. Ivana, the lead rep, the woman with the ice blue eyes, said, "This is Claire Bennett from Global Titan. The merger is dead. Obviously. But we have a $300 million hole in our Q1 strategy. Richard's lawyers are telling us you've sabotaged the client database." "I haven't sabotaged anything, Claire," I said, watching the Dallas skyline fade in the rearview mirror. "I've secured it. Richard was selling your future to Dubai. I stopped the leak. The database is intact, But the keys to the client relationships, the trust, the history, the strategy, those aren't in a computer. They're sitting in a coffee shop in Bishop Arts with me. I didn't wait for her to ask. I sent her a testing the enemy packet. It wasn't the shadow ledger. It was a perfectly crafted proposal for Global Titan to become the primary venture capital partner for Sunset Acquisitions. I wasn't asking for a job. I was offering them a way to save their $300 million investment. Richard is going to spend the next 5 years in litigation, I told her. Thorne & Associates is a radioactive brand now. But Sunset, we have the talent, we have the client's trust, and we have a clean slate. You fund our initial bridge loan to fight Richard's injunction, and we'll give you first right of refusal on our IPO. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the gears turning. These were New York sharks. They didn't care about loyalty or betrayal. They cared about ROI. We need proof that the clients will move, Claire said. Specifically Elias Thorne. If Elias goes, the rest follow. If he stays with whatever is left of Richard's firm, you're just a boutique startup with a lawsuit. Check your email in 5 minutes, I said. I hung up and called Elias. This was the pivot. I had told Elias about the shadow ledger and the Dubai sale over breakfast, but I hadn't asked him to sign anything. Now, I needed the hammer. Elias, I said. The FBI just cleared the building. Richard is in custody. I'm starting Sunset Acquisitions. I need a lead client to anchor the firm. I don't want your money yet. I want your signature on a letter of intent to move your portfolio. I need it in 4 minutes to close the bridge loan. Elias didn't hesitate. Ivana, Richard sold my blueprints to Dubai. I was going to sue him myself. But I'd rather watch you build something better. The signature is in your inbox. And Ivana? Make sure it hurts. I forwarded the signed letter of intent to Claire Bennett at Global Titan. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed. Transaction alert. Bridge loan of $5 million approved. Funds available. I used Richard's own partners to fund my war against him. He was fighting me with injunctions and fixers. I was fighting him with his own replacement. I pulled up to the co-working space. Marcus, Elena, and Sarah were standing outside, looking at their phones. They looked terrified. They had all just quit their stable jobs for a woman who was currently being sued by a billionaire. I stepped out of the car. I didn't say a word. I just held up my phone and showed them the bank balance. The injunction doesn't matter, I said. The capital is secured. The clients are moving. Richard Thorne thinks he's locked us out of the building. I looked up at the modest, brick-faced office. He doesn't realize we've already built a skyscraper in the cloud. Let's get to work. They say the truth will set you free. But in the corporate underworld, the truth is just a different kind of cage. I thought I had found the bottom of Richard Thorne's depravity. I thought the embezzlement and the Dubai sale were the peak of his betrayal. But as I sat in the quiet of our new headquarters, digging through the shadow ledger one last time to prepare our legal defense, I found a hidden partition. A file encrypted not with a password, but with a biometric key trace I'd accidentally bypassed during my frantic exit. It wasn't a financial file. It was a strategy folder dating back 10 years. I opened a document titled Legacy Replacement. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a plan to fire me. It was a plan that had started the day I was hired. I saw a spreadsheet of my entire career. Every promotion I'd received, every bonus, every mentorship session, it had all been timed. Richard hadn't hired me because I was the best. He had hired me because my father had been his first business partner, the man who actually came up with the Apex concept before dying in a random car accident that left Richard with 100% of the company. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. My father hadn't died of a heart attack or a mistake. There were notes here. Correspondence with a private security firm about my father's travel routes. About a mechanical failure that was scheduled for the same week Richard took out a massive keyman insurance policy on his partner. He didn't just steal my career, he stole my family. He had kept me close for 7 years, not out of affection but to keep his enemy's daughter under his thumb. To ensure that the one person who might have a legal claim to the original Apex patents was too grateful and loyal to ever look into the past. The $10 million buyout wasn't a cost-saving measure. It was the exact amount of the original insurance payout Richard had pocketed 20 years ago. He was trying to erase the last link to his crime before the merger auditors could dig into the company's founding papers. The revelation was like a physical blow. I felt the room spinning. I had been working for my father's killer. I had been calling him family. I had been building the empire that was built on my father's blood. There is a level of rage that goes beyond screaming. It's a cold, silent vacuum where the only thing that exists is the need for total annihilation. I called Richard's fixer attorney, the one who had filed the injunction. Put him on, I said when the assistant answered. Miss Ivana, Mr. Thorne is in processing. He can't. I have the legacy file, I interrupted. My voice was like a scalpel. Tell him that if he doesn't take my call from the holding cell in 5 minutes, the next person to see this file will be the district attorney's homicide division. Not fraud, homicide. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a collect call from the Dallas County Jail. Ivana? Richard's voice was haggard, stripped of its usual boom. You're playing a dangerous game. You don't know what you're looking at. I'm looking at the mechanical failure of a 2006 sedan, Richard. I said, my voice vibrating with a lethal calm. I'm looking at an insurance policy that funded your first skyscraper. I'm looking at the reason you've spent 7 years pretending to be my father. I gave you everything. He hissed into the phone. I made you a queen in this city. You made me a servant in my own house, I replied. But here's the revelation, Richard. The shadow ledger you're so worried about? That's for the FBI. But the legacy file? That's for me. I'm not going to give it to the police. Not yet. What do you want? He whispered, fear finally cracking his voice. I want the injunction dropped by 8 a.m., I said. I want a full notarized confession of the embezzlement leaving out the murder, for now. And I want the deeds to the Austin holdings transferred to Sunset Acquisitions. You have 4 hours. And if I do it? I looked out at the storm, the lightning reflecting in my eyes. Then I'll let you die in a federal prison for fraud, I said. Instead of a state prison for life. That's the only mercy you're ever going to get. I hung up. I sat in the dark, the legacy file glowing on the screen. The midpoint of this war had passed. I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for a ghost. They say that when you set out for revenge, you should dig 2 graves. But they didn't account for a woman who has spent her life building structures. I didn't need a second grave. I needed a bigger shovel. The legacy file changed the nature of the war. Before, I wanted to take Richard's company. Now, I wanted to take his soul. I wanted to watch the moment he realized that the girl he'd manipulated for a decade had become the architect of his total annihilation. I spent the pre-dawn hours at my desk, not in the co-working space, but at a private terminal I'd set up at the law firm I'd put on retainer. My lawyers were pale, their eyes bloodshot. They had seen the murder for hire notes in the legacy folder. Ivana, the lead counsel whispered, if we take this to the DA now we can have him moved to high-security remand. No bail, no contact. No, I said. If he's in high security, he can't sign the papers. I want the Austin holdings. I want the patents. I want the name Thorne erased from every contract in this state. We don't call the DA until the ink is dry on the transfers. The clock hit 7:58 a.m. The fax machine in the corner began to spit out pages. One after another, the notarized confession for the embezzlement check. The voluntary withdrawal of the injunction against Sunset Acquisitions check. And finally, the transfer of the Austin real estate deeds. Richard was folding. The Lion of Dallas was whimpering in a holding cell because he was terrified of a needle in his arm. He thought he was buying my silence. He thought this was a trade. He forgot that a trade requires both parties to be honorable. And he had spent 7 years teaching me that honor is just a word people use when they're about to lose. I signed the documents. In that moment, I became one of the largest real estate holders in the state. Sunset Acquisitions was no longer a boutique startup. We had the capital, we had the assets, and most importantly, we had the shadow ledger evidence that would ensure Richard and Arthur never saw the sun as free men again. Now I told the lawyers, call the DA. Send them the legacy file. All of it. The car accident report, the insurance payouts, the PI logs. Tell them Richard Thorne is a flight risk. I drove back to the Bishop Arts office. The team was waiting. They had seen the news the injunction had been dropped. They saw the Sunset logo on the morning business news as a rising force in Texas tech, but they didn't know the price. I walked into the break room and saw Sarah. She was looking at a photo of my father I'd pinned to the wall, A photo of him laughing in his old workshop before everything was stolen. "Is it over?" she asked. "The business part is over," I said. "Now comes the turning point. Now we show the world what happens when you underestimate the person who knows where all your bodies are buried." I stood before my new employees. 60 people who had risked everything to follow me. "Today," I said, my voice projecting with a power I'd never felt before, "Thorne and Associates ceases to exist. As of this morning, we have acquired their primary assets. We aren't just a marketing firm, we are an empire of accountability. And we are going to start by rebuilding the pension fund that Richard Thorne stole from." The room erupted. But I didn't feel the joy. I felt the weight of the legacy. I stepped into my private office and looked at the phone. One more call to make. To the New York Sharks. To Claire Bennett. "Claire," I said when she answered. "The bridge loan is no longer necessary. I own the assets now. I'm moving the IPO up to Q3. But if you want to stay as a partner, I have one condition." "What's that, Ivana?" "I want the name Thorne scrubbed from every building in Dallas, and I want the first building we rename to be the one where my father used to work." I wasn't just building a company. I was rewriting history. And for the first time in my life, the pen wasn't in Richard's hand, it was in mine. In the boardroom, they teach you about the terms of logistics and supply chains. They don't teach you what happens when the logistics and supply chains are human lives. When the first one falls, it doesn't just hit the later, it crushes everything in its path. Richard's confession for the embezzlement was the first domino. The murder charges were the second. By noon on Tuesday, the company wasn't just dying, it was being dismembered by the very people who had once bowed to it. The consequence of Richard's fall was a vacuum that pulled in everyone. Arthur Finch, seeing the murder charges, didn't stay loyal. He traded. He turned state's evidence within 2 hours of being processed, hoping to save himself from the needle. He gave up the names of every board member who had looked the other way. He gave up the names of the fixers in the Dallas PD. The dominoes were hitting the city's elite. Prominent judges, developers, and politicians who had accepted Richard's consulting fees were suddenly being served with subpoenas. The city of Dallas was shaking, and I was the one standing on the epicenter. But the major consequence for me wasn't the legal chaos. It was the human cost. I received a call from the hospital. Richard's youngest daughter, the one I had tutored, the one I had bought birthday presents for, had tried to contact me. She was 18, caught in a hurricane she didn't understand. Her father was a monster, her family fortune was frozen, and her world was ash. I sat in my new office, looking at the phone. I felt a surge of the old Ivana, the one who wanted to protect, to fix, to heal. But then I looked at the legacy file. I looked at the photo of my father's car. I realized that mercy for the daughter of a killer is a luxury a survivor can't always afford. If I helped her, I was helping his bloodline with the money he had stolen from mine. I didn't take the call. I directed my lawyers to set up a modest anonymous trust for her education strictly from my personal funds, not the company's, and then I cut the cord. The dominoes continued to fall. Global Titan Group, fearing the PR nightmare of being associated with a murderer, officially pulled out of the Texas market. They didn't just cancel the merger, they liquidated their local holdings. This was the consequence I had calculated. With Global Titan gone and Thorne and Associates in probate, there was no one left to compete for the Smart City project. Sunset Acquisitions was the only firm standing. Elias Thorne called me. "Ivana, the city council just reached out, they've stripped the contracts from Richard's estate. They want to know if Sunset can handle the full $400 million rollout. They want a meeting tomorrow. Tell them we don't meet at City Hall, Elias," I said. "Tell them they come to Bishop Arts. And tell them the price just went up 20%. We're the only ones left who know how the engine works." The consequence of my revenge was total market dominance. I had systematically removed every player on the board until I was the board itself. But as I looked at the empty chairs in my office, I felt the chill of the vacuum I'd created. When you destroy a kingdom to build a republic, you realize how lonely it is to be the only person who knows where the bodies are buried. I walked to the window and looked toward downtown. The Thorne and Associates sign was being taken down. I could see the cranes from here. "Richard," I whispered to the wind. "One more. There is a specific kind of silence in a prison visitation room. It's not the quiet of peace. It's the quiet of a vacuum. It's where the noise of the world, the stock tickers, the board meetings, the private jets finally stops. I didn't come here for an apology. You don't ask a predator for an apology when you've already broken its teeth. I came to witness the breakdown. Richard Thorne sat on the other side of the glass. He wasn't wearing the $5,000 Brioni suit anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look like gray parchment. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was thin and matted. He looked like an old man, just an old, tired man who had run out of lies. He picked up the receiver. His hand was shaking a fine, persistent tremor. I picked up mine. I didn't speak. I wanted him to be the first one to break the silence. I wanted to see if the Lion of Dallas had anything left but a growl. You look well, Ivana, he rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves on pavement. I see you've moved into the penthouse of the old Meridian building. My old building. It's not your building anymore, Richard, I said. It's the headquarters for Sunset Acquisitions. We took the sign down yesterday. The Thorne name is currently being ground into gravel at a landfill in Arlington. You think you've won? He hissed, leaning in until his forehead touched the glass. You think you can just step into my shoes? You're just like me, Ivana. You used Sarah. You used Elias. You used your father's death to get a bridge loan. You've become the very thing you hated. I looked at him, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No grief. Just a clinical, detached observation. No, Richard. I didn't use them. I freed them. I gave them a choice. You never gave me a choice. You took my father, you took my inheritance, and you tried to take my freedom. I didn't become you. I became the consequence of you. I watched as the defiance drained out of him. It was a physical collapse. His shoulders slumped. His eyes, once so sharp and calculating, went dull. He looked at the floor. Arthur told them everything, he whispered. About the smart city blueprints. About the insurance policy. They're going to seek the death penalty, Ivana. They're calling it premeditated murder for financial gain. I know, I said. I'm the one who gave the DA the motive. I'm the one who found the original policy in the shadow ledger. I made sure they had everything they needed to ensure you never walk under a Texas sky again. Richard Thorne, the man who had loomed over my life like a god, started to cry. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was a pathetic, gasping sound. He was terrified. Not of what he'd done but of what was being done to him. Please, he gasped, his breath fogging the glass between us. Tell them it was an accident. Tell them I loved your father. If you testify for the defense. If you say I was like a father to you. I can get life without parole. I don't want to die in here, Ivana. I stood up. I didn't put the phone down yet. My father died in a car with no brakes, Richard. He died alone and terrified because of a man he called his best friend. You don't get to ask for a father's mercy from the daughter you tried to destroy. You wanted to fire me by the end of the year. Well, the year isn't over yet and you're already gone. I walked away from the glass. I didn't look back at him. I could hear him screaming my name through the thick walls, a desperate, animal sound that faded as the heavy steel doors hissed shut behind me. I walked out into the Texas heat. The air was thick, but for the first time in my life I could breathe. The antagonist hadn't just broken down. He had vanished. He was no longer a monster. He was just a ghost in a cage. And I was the one with the key to the future. I got into my car and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I whispered, "Now, let's see what I can build on the ruins." They say that when you kill a king, you don't just take his crown, you take his debts. I thought the legacy file was the final chapter. I thought my father's death was the ultimate secret Richard Thorne was hiding. I was wrong. The final twist didn't come from a prison cell or a boardroom. It came from the one place I never thought to look, my father's own encrypted archives, which I had finally managed to fully unlock using the biometric data from a locket he'd left my mother. I sat in the silence of my new empire, watching the data stream across the screen. I wasn't looking at Richard's crimes anymore. I was looking at my father's. The smart city blueprints, the ones I thought Richard had stolen, weren't just my father's invention. They were a collaboration. My father hadn't been the innocent visionary I'd built a pedestal for. The archives revealed that he and Richard had built the initial company on a foundation of industrial espionage. They had stolen the core patents from a defunct European lab in the 90s. My father wasn't just a victim. He was an architect of the very system that eventually consumed him. He knew Richard was dangerous. He knew the brakes were failing not on his car, but on their morality. The accident happened because my father was preparing to turn state's evidence against Richard to save himself. But the twist went deeper. As I scrolled through the final logs, I found a series of recurring payments from my father's private account to an anonymous recipient. A recipient whose identity was hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies. I traced the routing numbers, my heart hammered against my ribs. The money wasn't going to a blackmailer or a mistress. It was going into a trust fund for a child in New York. A child born 6 months after my father's accident. I opened the birth certificate scan buried in the folder. Name, Claire Bennett. The lead representative from Global Titan. The shark who had helped me destroy Richard. The woman I had invited into my inner circle. She wasn't just a partner, she was my half-sister. And she wasn't here to help me build Sunset Acquisitions. She was here to take back what she believed was her half of the empire. I looked at the bridge loan contract I'd signed with Claire. I hadn't read the fine print of the default clause closely enough in my rush for revenge. If Sunset Acquisitions failed to meet its Q3 IPO targets, 51% of the company didn't go back to Global Titan, it reverted to Claire Bennett personally. I looked up. Claire was standing in the doorway of my office. She wasn't wearing her usual business suit. She was wearing a simple black dress, and she was holding a tablet that was synced to my own server. "You were always the favorite, Ivana," she said. Her voice was no longer the professional tone of a New York executive. It was the cold, sharp edge of a woman who had been waiting 20 years for her turn. "Our father left you the name, the memories, and the loyalty of the staff. He left me a trust fund and a letter telling me to never look back." "Claire." I started, my voice failing me. "Don't," she snapped. "Richard killed him. Yes. But you? You've been living in his shadow, pretending this was about justice. This was never about justice. It was about who gets to sit in the chair. And since you've been so kind as to acquire all of Richard's assets and consolidate them under Sunset, you've made it very easy for me to take it all in one move." She tapped her tablet. "I just triggered the ethics violation clause in our partnership. Based on the fact that you withheld the legacy file from the authorities for 4 hours to leverage a real estate transfer, you've breached the fiduciary duty of our contract. The bridge loan is now in default. As of 30 seconds ago, I am the majority shareholder of Sunset Acquisitions." The climactic shift was instantaneous. I wasn't the hunter anymore. I was the prey. I had spent so much time looking at the man in the cage that I didn't see the wolf walking through the front door. "You can keep your office for tonight, Ivana," Claire said, turning toward the door. "But tomorrow morning, the sign changes again. It's not Sunset anymore. It's Bennett and Associates. After all, it's only fair I get my name on the building too." I sat in the dark. The empire I'd built in 6 weeks crumbling in 60 seconds. The final wasn't a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of blood. They say the most dangerous place to be is between a mother bear and her cubs. They're wrong. The most dangerous place to be is between a woman and the empire she just built with her own bare hands. Claire thought she had won because she had a contract and a bloodline. She thought that because she shared my father's DNA, she shared my father's seat at the table. But Claire made the same mistake Richard made. She focused on the paper, she focused on the title. She thought the company was the building, the bank account, and the logo. I stayed in that office for 3 hours after Claire walked out. I didn't pack a box. I didn't cry. I sat at my terminal and I looked at the Phoenix Protocol, a contingency plan I had written back in week 2 when I first realized that in Texas, someone is always coming for your crown. Claire owned 51% of Sunset Acquisitions. She owned the bridge loan. She owned the lease. But I owned the people. At 5 a.m., I sent a single, encrypted text message to the inner circle: Marcus, Elena, and Sarah. "The wolf is in the house. Meet at the warehouse on Commerce. Bring your personal drives. Leave the company hardware." I didn't need to explain. They had seen the way Claire looked at the books. They knew that a Bennett and Associates would be just another version of the Thorne regime, cold, distant, and built on the backs of the many for the benefit of the one. By 6 a.m. the Bishop Arts office was an empty shell. Claire would arrive to find the servers wiped legally, of course. as the proprietary code belonged to the individual architects under a creative independence clause I'd slipped into their contracts 3 days ago. We met at the warehouse, a gritty, industrial space I'd purchased with the Austin real estate deeds Richard had signed over to me personally before the Global Titan lawyers could touch them. Because the deeds were transferred as part of a private criminal settlement, they weren't part of the Sunset Acquisitions asset pool. I stood on a wooden crate in the center of the dusty floor. Marcus was there with his laptop. Elena was already on her phone, redirecting the press releases. Sarah was holding a stack of new contracts. Claire Bennett thinks she bought a company, I told them, my voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls. But all she bought was a name and a debt. She has the shell. We have the soul. Marcus, I said. Upload the Cloud S framework to the new server. Elena, call Elias Thorne. Tell him the Smart City project isn't moving to Bennett. It's moving to Legacy Foundations. I looked at the group. We were tired. We were technically unemployed by the standards of the SEC. But we were free. The inheritance of shadows is over. I said. My father and Richard Thorne built their world on theft and secrets. Claire is trying to build hers on a legal technicality. We are going to build ours on the truth. I walked to the open door of the warehouse and watched the sun finally crest over the Dallas skyline. The towers looked different now. They didn't look like fortresses anymore. They looked like targets. Claire Bennett would spend the next year in court trying to prove that 51% of an empty room was worth the millions she had spent to steal it. By the time she realized what had happened, Legacy Foundations would already be the lead contractor for the state. Richard Thorne tried to bury me. My father's secrets tried to drown me. My sister tried to replace me. But they all forgot one thing about Texas soil. If you bury something deep enough and you give it enough heat, it doesn't just stay down. It turns into something harder than any diamond. Sarah, I said without looking back, call the New York Times, tell them I have a story for them. It's a story about a sister, a secret, and the end of a dynasty. I was no longer the ghost in the machine. I was the machine itself. And I was just getting started. Claire's biggest mistake wasn't the takeover. It was the timing. She assumed that by taking the majority share of the company she took the momentum. But in the digital age, momentum isn't a physical asset, it's a frequency, and I had already changed the channel. As the sun rose over Dallas, the aftermath began to ripple through the financial wires. I didn't wait for Claire to file a countersuit. I went on the offensive. I didn't just want my company back. I wanted to ensure that the name Bennett became as toxic as the name Thorne. I released the scorched earth packet. It wasn't just the embezzlement files or the murder evidence. It was a meticulously curated history of Claire's involvement with Global Titan's more questionable acquisitions. I showed how she had used the same fiduciary breach tactic to dismantle 3 other family-owned firms in the Midwest. I wasn't just a victim. I was a whistleblower for an entire industry. By 9 a.m., Global Titan's stock price began to slide. The shark from New York was suddenly bleeding in her own waters. The board of directors at Global Titan, seeing the massive PR disaster I was brewing, did what sharks always do when one of their own is wounded. They began to circle. Ivana, Sarah said, looking up from her tablet in the warehouse. The Global Titan board just issued a statement. They're suspending Claire Bennett pending an internal investigation into her acquisition tactics. They're calling her actions unauthorized and inconsistent with their corporate values. I leaned against a concrete pillar. Of course they are. They're trying to save the merger capital. But it's too late. The clients aren't looking at Global Titan anymore. They're looking at us. Elias Thorne arrived at the warehouse at 10:30 a.m. He didn't come in a limo. He came in his old pickup truck, wearing a pair of jeans and a work shirt. He looked around the dusty, industrial space and smiled. I like the new office, Ivana, he said, shaking my hand. It smells like hard work instead of expensive air freshener. Where do I sign the contract for the Smart City pilot? Right here, Elias, I said, handing him a simple 2-page agreement. No hidden fees. No account optimization. Just a 50/50 partnership between Legacy Foundations and your estate. As he signed, I realized that he had finally reached its end. The old world, the world of Richard, Arthur, and Claire, was a world of mirrors and traps. This new world was built on solid ground. It was Claire. I stepped outside the warehouse, into the bright Texas sun. You've destroyed me, she whispered. Her voice was broken, stripped of its New York polish. The board is suing me for the bridge loan loss. I'm being blacklisted from every firm on the East Coast. Is this what you wanted? To leave your own sister with nothing. I looked at a hawk circling high above the Trinity River. I didn't leave you with nothing, Claire, I said. I left you with exactly what you gave me, a legal document and a choice. You can fight the board and lose everything in a decade of litigation, or you can sign over the remaining 49% of the Sunset shell to me for $1. I'll use the shell to pay off the pension fund debts, and the board will drop the personal liability suit against you. $1? She gasped. The assets are worth $50 million. The assets are gone, Claire. I took them. All that's left is the debt and the name. Sign it, or go down with the ship. You have 10 minutes. She signed. The notification popped up on my screen at 10:45 a.m. Transfer complete. I walked back into the warehouse. The team was cheering. Marcus was already coding the new interface for Legacy Foundations. Elena was booking our first national press tour. Sarah was organizing the employee ownership documents. I looked at the Legacy file one last time. I didn't delete it. I moved it to a secure, offline drive. It was a reminder, not of the pain, but of the price. I had lost my father, my mentor, and my sister. But I had found myself.